to be against discrimination of any kind in our country.
Our rights come from nature and God, not from government.
All God asks of you is faithfulness.
35 years of fighting for the family, standing for the church, laboring to return to a moral and biblically based culture.
This is the American Family Association at AFA Today.
It's Kevin McCullough from New York in the studios of AFA Today, and we're glad that you're with us every single weekday at the same time. Thank you for being here and for joining us in the middle of your busy day. We always try to get you caught up on what's going on in the most important stories related to you, the faith-based, faith and values and family-oriented person, and why it matters. And today, the entire nation is witnessing a democracy that is partially at work. I'll explain why I put that qualifier on there in a bit. But just concluded on Capitol Hill less than an hour ago a continual speech by one Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, who was attempting to draw attention, the nation's attention, to the problems that Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, has presented to the people that have already felt the impact of what has been implemented, but also highlight some of the problems that are yet to come. Now, it was the exercising of his constitutional options that has seemed to cause not only people of the opposite political party from Mr. Cruz, but even some of his own party members a little bit of trouble and a little bit of hassle. Take a listen.
It's the first time I've seen when Republican leadership is actively whipping the Republican conference to support Harry Reid and give him the power to enact his agenda. I've never seen that before. I'm quite confident is not what Texans expect of me. And I'm quite confident when each Republican goes back to his or her home state, it's not what our constituents expect of us. And I'm also quite confident that if and when we return home and stand in front of our constituents, if we're asked, Senator, why did you vote yes on cloture to give Harry Reid the power to fund Obamacare to gut the House continuing resolution? None of us were elected by our party leadership. We've got a different boss. So any Republican who casts a vote for cloture is saying, yes, I want Harry Reid to have the power to do that, and then I'll vote against it once it no longer matters, once it's a free symbolic vote.
Now, is that really what this was all about? Coming on to the guest line with us here at AFA Today is someone that has been tracking Senator Cruz since he was just a wee, sorely outspent Senate candidate in the race for U.S. Senate from the state of Texas, great state of Texas, my home state. But his name is Steve Deace, and he's host of the Steve Deace Show, which is heard on many of these stations every evening right here on AFR Talk. And Steve joins us from his broadcast location in Iowa today, the first state of the political process as we think about the 2016 race. And Steve, first of all, welcome back to AFA Today. But a lot of people have questioned whether or not this exercise that Senator Cruz has gone through in the last 24 hours, did it matter at all? What difference does it make that this senator stood up and talked for 20 hours straight?
You know, I've gotten this question a bit the last 24 hours, and it's mainly because, let's face it, we have been burned so many times that we almost don't want to believe in the process again. But to me, I think for those of us that are people of faith who begin our worldview with the premise that a dead man was dead and got back up to live again, that I really believe that we ought to be really flexible in defining what victory looks like in the world's eyes. And I think anytime we stand out on principle, if nothing else was accomplished out of this, what we've seen the last 24 hours, and we can get into some of this if you want, but you know, I've got this nickname for Ted Cruz. It's The Natural, after one of my favorite baseball movies when I was a kid. I'm going to have to change his name to The Winnowing Fork, because what has happened over the last 24 hours is he's done a lot of separating of the wheat from the chaff. And we're not just talking about the left from the right. We're talking about the middle left from the right. We're really talking about grassroots Americans concerned about the future, freedom and prosperity. My oldest, Anna, my 12-year-old, whom you know, asked me as Amy and I were watching this over the last 24 hours. She asked me, "What is this all about?" And I looked at her and said, "It's about your future and whether you're going to have one. That's what it's about." And I think we have exposed really who's here to fight, who's just shadow boxing, and if nothing else, he's made our primary target list for 2014 a much more ripe environment. But before your listeners write this off, let me caution them with this. When this month began, the system was just really, for lack of a better term, frankly, hell-bent on going to another pointless war in Syria. We stopped them. 3 weeks ago, the idea the House would vote to defund Obamacare was a pipe dream. We made them do it, and then the Republicans who didn't want to do it then wanted to hold a post-we voted against Obamacare rally last Friday. So this has been a watershed month of the people in the grassroots taking power back from the system. So I wouldn't write this off quite yet.
Let me just ask you, and we're speaking with Steve Deace, who's host of the Steve Deace Show, heard on many of these same stations. Steve, let me ask you, the criticism that has been leveled at Mr. Cruz, some of the most stinging words coming from people that he identifies with in terms of his political party. How effective are parties moving forward? I mean, every day I take to a microphone and I find myself, whether it's in the urban city of New York or the hinterlands of the Midwest or the sweet tea folks of the Deep South, that in reality principles really do count. When we attach labels to them, oftentimes that really mucks everything up. And at the end of the day, I may even be able to convince 2 or 3 inner city African-American grandmothers to defend a child who got jailed for having a plastic gun when they would normally be against guns in every single way when argued from a partisan perspective. It seems to me that the way of the political party is causing more problems and more division than it has ever solved. And in this day and age, is this kind of a sign that maybe parties don't count so much anymore?
I think your observation, Kevin, is right on the money. Thomas Jefferson once famously said, "If I should go to heaven, but only with members of a political party, I would rather not go at all." And what happens often is we can't help it. You see this in denominationalism in the church. We just can't help ourselves. Right away, we kind of want to decide, hey, who's with us and who's with us and who's against us. And then once that happens, then groupthink comes in. It ceases being about principles and ideas, and it starts being about affiliation and identity. And what you're seeing happening in the Republican Party is really happening for 3 reasons. Number one is new technology. Reform movements always are accompanied by new emerging technologies. A great example is the Protestant Reformation. I mean, why wasn't Luther burned at the stake like previous reformers before him? Well, previous reformers didn't have Johannes Gutenberg inventing the printing press. So they couldn't get their messages out to the masses the way that Luther could to bypass the process and essentially insulate himself. Right. So we have new technology with social media and the internet, number one. The second thing is we are becoming a more of a postmodern culture that is both good and bad. On one hand, we are watering down notions of moral absolutes and truths. On the other hand, we are much more skeptical of institutional kind of thinking. And so that's also working against the Republican Party. But thirdly, what you're seeing really is that there's those that are in the party because they believe in issues and principles, and those who believe in the party because they want to advance the party. They want the Republican Party to be more like the Democrat Party. You mentioned African Americans you can convince on certain issues. They vote almost in lockstep with the Democrat Party, even though their belief system is a lot different than Ellen DeGeneres'. But they both vote Democrat because they think they need to work together to have access to government. And what the Karl Roves of the world want is they want the Republican Party to look like that, to not be about worldviews and principles and issues, but to be about coalitions. The problem is most of us become Republicans because of worldviews, principles, and issues. We don't want to form coalitions with people that disagree with us. We either want to convert them or at the ballot box defeat them. And that's where this tension is taking place. And that's where you even see people on Fox News that a lot of our listeners think are our friends. They're stunned to see these are the first people to pile on Ted Cruz worse than MSNBC would, and that's because Cruz is threatening their gravy train. He's exposing the emperor has no clothes, and that really what we're doing up here, a lot of it, he used this reference himself last night. This is really like pro wrestling where the outcome is predetermined. We're really not fighting for the people up here.
Right. That's the voice of Steve Deace. I'm Kevin McCullough. We're glad you're with us, and we will take your calls, but I want to continue with a couple more questions with Steve. Let me ask you about this. In the 20-plus hours that he spoke, the opportunity to bring up and to really level accusations against this behemoth bill, Obamacare, is really quite advantageous. You've got 20 hours on a stage in which you can basically peel off point by point that you want to make about it. What did Ted Cruz hope to achieve in talking about Obamacare for 20 hours, knowing that at the end of that time, Harry Reid did have the ability to kind of cut his fingers off and say, now you have to go sit down? He obviously had the platform, but what were the 3 or 4 things about Obamacare specifically that he felt like the American people needed to know that they didn't know as of yet?
I think the number one exercise was by entering all this information into the record. You saw all the emails and letters that he and Mike Lee, Marco Rubio, and many others read throughout the course of the last 20 hours.
Right.
By entering all this information into the record, by reading letters like Jimmy Hoffa Jr. at the Teamsters Union had written to the White House, reading these things into the record, you're putting Republicans in an indefensible position to vote for this. See, the entire goal is to make it that Harry Reid cannot defund or put the funding for Obamacare back in the continuing resolution with a simple majority vote, but that he has to do it with a supermajority 60 vote threshold, which is over the last few years the way budget battles have actually been determined, which is why Reid has never passed a budget out of his chamber. Never. Mm-hmm. Not when he was there under George W. Bush. He couldn't pass a budget out of his chamber, Kevin, when he had 60 Democrats and President Obama in the White House. He's never passed a budget. And so what Cruz wants the Republicans to do is to hold together so that Reid has to have 60 votes to put the funding for Obamacare back in, because if the Republicans hold together, then he doesn't have 60 votes, and then you can go pressure people like Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, a very vulnerable Democrat next year in a very vulnerable red state, and perhaps turn a couple of those Democrats, try to convince them to vote for their own self-interest rather than the party's interest. Because if you're a Democrat in a red state running on re-election as, I voted to put the funding back in Obamacare, you're essentially just saying, I don't want to be a senator next year.
That would be an interesting outcome if indeed it has teeth to it. And obviously Ted Cruz placed a big bet on hoping that would be made effective. We're talking with Steve Deace, host of the Steve Deace Show, heard on many of these stations each weeknight. Let me ask you, Steve, because there are a number of other stories that are hovering around the central one of Ted Cruz doing the non-filibuster filibuster, and that was one of them was that the double standard of Congress being exempt from the rules of Obamacare, I think got reverberated a bit more because of this than it has been to date. Obviously, politicos, people that read political websites and the op-ed pages of newspapers on a daily basis, they were aware of some of this, but I think the average person in America is not aware that there was a real double standard that the president had tried to implement in the execution of this program.
And ironically enough, Dick Durbin from Illinois, I thought really helped Senator Cruz make that point. If you've ever driven down a road and thought, why do all these bugs just impale themselves voluntarily on my windshield? Well, now after watching Dick Durbin last night, you know the answer. He really walked into a buzzsaw, and really Cruz turned everything that he was trying to say around so that essentially, if I could sum up what Dick Durbin said last night in the U.S. Senate, it was, well, let them eat cake. Well, if you can't afford what Obamacare is going to do, if you can't afford the compassion we're giving you, if you can't afford the compassion we're giving you, then you can fly coach. You can fly coach. And then he came back again this morning to again make the same point by illustrating how much better their health care is to what the average person has. And Senator Cruz said, well, I agree. That's why I think we ought to give up what we have and let's go ahead and give ourselves what we want to give to everybody else. I think what you're dealing with here is that
Steve, can we hold you for one more segment, another 10 minutes?
Sure.
All right. We're talking with Steve Deace, and we're analyzing Ted Cruz's filibuster on the Senate floor. It's Calvin McCullough. This is AFA Today. We're glad you're with us right here on AFR Talk. Don't go away.